Hey guys, welcome back to 17 Square Meters Garden. Today I want to share with you a few tips on how to grow and care for African violets and how to make them bloom non-stop. Okay, so here are my African violets, which are correctly called Streptocarpus section Sandpolia. They are all in bloom right now, which they don't always bloom at the same time. I mean, they bloom non-stop, but they bloom in waves. And the purple one is usually the first one to start. It had its peak about 2 weeks ago, and now the white one and the pink one are catching up, plenty of buds on both of them. So how to care for these beautiful plants? Well, right from the start I will tell you they are not the easiest houseplants to grow. They are high maintenance, but do not get discouraged because it just takes time to figure out how to grow them. So today I want to share with you a few tips to help you out. Tip number 1, light. One of the main reasons why African violets are not blooming is because they do not receive a sufficient amount of light. You would want to place them in a bright, indirect light. What does it mean? It means that you wouldn't want to put them in a spot far away from the window in some dark corner of your house. Place them close to a window, but not in a direct sunlight. The intensity of the full sun would scorch the leaves and it would also be too hot for African violets. So ideally, in summer you will place them in front of a north-northeast facing window, and in winter in front of the south-facing window. They don't really need to be under grow lights, although if you are in a situation like me where all your windows are facing north, in winter months it may not be enough. And as you can see, for example, here on my purple African violets, the plant has developed long petioles, so long leaf stems that are reaching upwards, and that's a sign that it doesn't receive enough sunlight. So I could potentially put this one under grow light. But on the other hand, if the leaves lose color, that means that the sun is too intense. So when you will place your African violets in front of a window, two things to keep in mind is, first, you wouldn't want the leaves to be actually touching the window, so make sure there's a distance between the plant and the window. And also, no plants will appreciate being hit by cold winter air when you open the window to refresh your room, and especially African violets will not appreciate that. They do not like cold. Keep them in place that has room temperature between 18 and 27 degrees Celsius, and do not expose them to changing temperatures and to cold wind. Okay, tip number 2, watering. And watering African violets is probably one of the trickiest of all the things. First things first, they will not tolerate water on their leaves. If you wet their leaves, they will look burned. So always try to water them from underneath. And now, how much water you should give and how often you should water? Unfortunately, I don't have a simple answer for you. I remember studying African violets during my horticulture qualifications, and my professor insisted on the fact that the easiest way to kill your African violets is to overwater them. So you should always wait for the soil to slightly dry out before you water them again. And I followed that method for several months, and perhaps I waited too long. Because what happened is my African violets stopped blooming. Like, they wouldn't bloom for months. So then I did the exact opposite, which I do not recommend, but I placed them all together in one large saucer, and I made sure that there's always water standing in that saucer, so that they were permanently wet, and they rebloomed. But as my professor said, the easiest way to kill our African violets is to overwater them, so I definitely don't recommend that. But what I do right now is I place them in their individual plastic saucers, and I make sure to give them some water every 2 to 3 days. So I do not let them dry out for more than 2 days in a row, and that seems to be working fine for now. They bloom, they look healthy, so that's what I would recommend. Just water them very often, pour the water in the saucer, let them have a drink, then remove excess water, and do it frequently. Tip number 3 is fertilizing. If you want your African violets to bloom non-stop, then you have to feed them regularly. As long as you're using NPK fertilizer for flowering plants, that's fine. You do not need a specific African violets fertilizer. And now, if the bottle gives you directions for monthly use, then cut it down the strength of the fertilizer to 1/4 and feed your violets weekly. They need regular feeds. 1 time per month won't do the trick. Either feed them each time you water them with a diluted fertilizer, obviously, or at least weekly. I fertilize my African violets year-round because, for example, right now we are in winter, they are in full bloom, so I am fertilizing them. Mix the fertilizer with water, pour it at the bottom of your saucer, let them have a drink, then as with watering, remove the excess water, wash your saucer so that it's not smelly. If you are using organic fertilizer, those can get kind of smelly. So once your plant had a drink, wash the saucer and feed them regularly. tip number 4, planting and repotting. African violets bloom better when they are slightly pot-bound, so always make sure that the pot is smaller than the spread of the leaves, which you can see here. That's a perfect example. Also, do not repot them more often than every 2 years and only if necessary. And then your new container should be just slightly bigger than your previous one. Also, I don't recommend using terracotta pots because, as you can see, with the amount of water that African violets need, terracotta gets really moldy and it looks unsightly. There are specific containers for African violets, self-watering containers, and I hope to get some of those at some point because I think that's really handy to have that water reservoir at the bottom of the pot. For the potting mix, African violets have very fine roots, so they need very porous potting mix. You can buy a specific African violets potting mix if you can find one. I have actually never seen anything like it for sale here where I live, so I create my own potting mix. I use good quality universal potting mix that contains different types of peat, worm castings for extra nutrients, and perlite. And then you would want to add coarse perlite to it, so that 50% is potting mix and 50% is a coarse perlite. That will be optimal mix for your African violets. Do not use anything soil-based, anything with clay, because that will simply be too heavy and too water retentive. When you plant your African violets, also do not compact the soil very much around the roots. They need that porous, very light potting mix, so just gently press the soil, but do not try to compact the soil too much. And the last tip, tip number 5, is kinda obvious, but I think it's still worth mentioning. Regularly remove spent blooms and dead or damaged leaves. You don't need any scissors or anything like that, just pinch them with your finger because that will obviously give your plant more energy to produce new beautiful blooms. Okay, so here are all of my tips on how to grow African violets. I hope that they will help you take better care of your plants. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Bye!